Hey everybody, this is Cecil Alexander with Jazz Lesson Videos, and today we're going to be talking about 5 ways to improve your up-tempo playing. All the playing excerpts in this video can be found in my latest resource with Jazz Lesson Videos, 25 Up-Tempo Jazz Etudes. You can find the link in the description below, and you can use the coupon code FAST5 for an additional $5 off. So my first tip for improving your up-tempo soloing is going to be the use of bebop scales. Bebop scales can be really useful for extending your lines, especially over fast tempos when you don't really have as much time to hear what you're going to do or think about what you're about to do. So my approach to bebop scales is that there are 3 main bebop scales. The most common one is going to be the dominant bebop scale. So if we're in the key of G, doing like a G7 chord, the dominant bebop scale would just be a Mixolydian scale with an F sharp added. The next bebop scale is going to be the major bebop scale, and we'll do that off of C. So it'll be the same as the major scale, but with an A flat added. And then the last bebop scale we'll take a look at is going to be the Phrygian dominant bebop scale, and we'll do that off of E. So here's the E Phrygian dominant bebop scale. So that's going to be a dominant scale with the flat 9 and a flat 13, as well as the natural 7 passing tone added in there. So the bebop scales are not only useful for extending your lines, but they also give your lines great harmonic clarity, especially when you're trying to outline chord changes over fast tempos. So you want to gain fluency with playing the bebop scales descending from every chromatic note. This will just ensure that wherever you end up within the harmony, you'll be able to find a way out using chromatic enclosure or chromatic approach. So if I descend the bebop scale from, say, the 9th degree, what's going to happen is the chord tones of the scale are now not going to be on strong beats anymore. So it'll sound like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So you notice the natural 7 fell on a strong beat, the 6 fell on a strong beat, the 4th, and I want to keep the chord tones of that G dominant 7 falling on strong beats. So I'm going to add in extra chromatic approach to land on the root of the scale. And then I can just continue to descend for as long as I want, or for as long as the instrument allows me to. And you can do the same thing with any non-chord tone or any non-scale tone, just kind of connect back into the scale using a simple chromatic approach or a chromatic enclosure. You can even take melodic ideas that you have and extend them using the bebop scale. So if I start off a line, say something like this, say that's over a G7, I land on the 4th degree, I resolve it back into the scale on the 3rd, and then I continue down the scale from the 3rd. So that's an easy way to extend a line using the dominant bebop scale. And the same thing can be applied to the major bebop scale and the Phrygian dominant bebop scale as well. Here's an example of bebop scales as well as a couple other concepts being applied over a standard. So our next concept that we're going to take a look at that'll help your up-tempo playing is going to be the use of arpeggios and arpeggio variations. So we can relate the arpeggios to the bebop scales that we just checked out, especially the dominant bebop scale. You have arpeggios that exist off of each chord tone. So off of the root, you have a G7, off of the 3rd, B minor 7 flat 5. Off the 5th, we had D minor 7, and off the flat 7th, we have F major 7. And you already have kind of cool extended lines that you can use just by connecting those arpeggios to the scale. So if I do F major 7 ascending, land on the 5th, and then descend the scale from there. You can do the same thing from all the other chord tones as well. So D minor 7, there I ascended the arpeggio, landed on the 3rd, and then continue down the scale from there. B minor 7 flat 5, and G7, where I land on E natural, I resolve that down the scale to D using a chromatic approach and continue down. So another thing that you can do to add a little bit more interest to those lines is land on a non-scale tone after you play the arpeggio. Here I go up F major 7, I land on E flat, resolve it to D using a chromatic enclosure, and continue down the scale from there. Same thing with, say, B minor 7 flat 5. Use A flat on a strong beat, resolve to the root, and then continue down the scale from there. Another thing that you can do with your arpeggios to add a little bit more forward motion to your lines is use a pivot arpeggio. We're going to take a look at a pivot arpeggio with a rhythmic variation. If you're not familiar, a pivot is going to be when you take, say, a F major 7 arpeggio, F, A, C, E, and then you drop the remaining, the top 3 notes down 1 octave. So you end up with A, C, and E down the octave. And we're going to add one more step to this by doing a chromatic approach before the second note of that arpeggio and doing the remaining 3 notes as part of an 8th note triplet. Do that up the octave as well. So there I did the F major 7 arpeggio, landed on E flat, the flat 6, resolved it to the 5th, and then continue down the scale from there. And, you know, applying that to melodic ideas that you already have in your playing, like I mentioned this little phrase that we did before. So I did that little cell into the 4th, resolved it to the 3rd, and then maybe I'll do a pivot arpeggio off of B. Land on A flat, and then continue down the scale from there. So phrase, land on the 4th, resolve to the 3rd, pivot arpeggio, non-scale tone, resolve, and then continue down the scale. Here's an example of using pivot arpeggios and some other melodic concepts over a jazz standard. Another concept that you can add into your playing to improve your up-tempo playing is chromatic enclosures and approaches. So you already have some chromaticism within the bebop scales through the use of resolving non-scale tones and non-chord tones that fall on strong beats, but you can also add in chromaticism outside of the scale. So if I were to take something like this approach, which goes from the 6th up to the root of, say, the dominant bebop scale, that's going to be an example of an approach that exists sort of outside of the scale, even though it kind of, you know, clearly outlines the 6th to the root. From there, I could continue down the scale from the root, but instead of just descending from the 5th to the 3rd, I'll do that same approach, but descending, because I see that minor 3rd distance that I can fill in chromatically. So from there, I'll just descend the scale from the 3rd. So basically anywhere you see a minor 3rd distance, you can kind of fill it in with that little rhythmic and chromatic approach. And you can also do it to highlight notes that are outside of the scale. You can highlight non-chord tones, really anything that you choose, as long as you like the sound of it. Another example of a chromatic enclosure that exists outside of the bebop scale is going to be one of my favorites. This is kind of a decorated chromatic enclosure with some rhythmic variation added into it. And it's very ornate. Again, it kind of takes the space of a minor 3rd, but it's going to approach a note that's a half step above the note that you start on. So if I start on E, my target is going to be F. And this one's pretty cool because you can kind of throw it in anywhere, really. So I might do it going from the 3rd to the 4th, and then resolve the 4th to the 3rd, continue down the scale from there. And then once I get down to the 5th there, I might do that same descending minor 3rd approach that I did before. Then continue down the scale from there. So you can see how, using these three concepts so far, we can really create really long extended lines that go over the bar line. Here's an example of using some extended chromatic approaches and enclosures over jazz standard. The next concept that you can use to improve your up-tempo playing is going to be the use of melodic cells. So there are a lot of different types of melodic cells. Basically what it is going to be a short melodic phrase that you can transpose through a scale. Usually you want to look for a 4-note or 5-note phrase. 4 notes are best, probably because the fastest harmonic motion or rhythm that you'll come across in a jazz standard is going to be 2 beats per chord typically. And if you have 4-note phrases that outline each of those, you can play really long ornate lines over fast moving chord changes, especially over something like giant steps where you have 2 chords per measure typically. So the most common type of melodic cell that we're going to come across is going to be the 1, 2, 3, 5. If I do that again off of G, thinking of the G dominant scale, 1, 2, 3, 5 would just be G, A, B, D. I could transpose that through the scale if I choose and do basically 1, 2, 3, 5 cells off the different modes within C major or G Mixolydian. So I might kind of pick and choose which of those melodic cells I like the sound of the most, especially over that G7. For me, I tend to prefer the sound of the one off the root, off the 4th, off the 5th, and off the flat 7th. And again, I can use those to extend my line. So I might go up the melodic cell from the flat 7th, land on the 3rd, and then go down the scale from there. And I can do the same thing even down the octave after that. So I end up with this long multi-octave line. So here's an example of me using melodic cells over a jazz standard. So the last tip for improving your up-tempo playing is going to be a little bit more guitar specific. This is going to focus on the right hand and picking technique. The main thing that I like to keep in mind, especially when I'm playing faster tempos, is to try to emphasize what's called the rest stroke technique. So this is something that's borrowed from classical guitar technique. And basically the idea is that for me, some people will do this with an upstroke, but I just do it with downstrokes. Your downstrokes are going to sort of be buried in the strings. So if I play a downstroke, say, on the low E string, the pick is going to rest on the A string. And then my upstrokes are going to escape the strings. So this is kind of my general picking motion, and I'll apply that to all the different strings. By the time I get to the high E string, even though there's not a string for me to rest on, I kind of have that motion ingrained at that point, and I feel like I can feel how much distance I need in order to come back up with the upstroke. So rest strokes are going to be really useful for accuracy and staying relaxed while you're playing fast. And I'd recommend just to kind of get the motion together to try just practicing tremolo picking on one string and really feel like you're emphasizing each of those downstrokes as you do that. So another thing that's going to work in conjunction with the rest stroke, especially downward rest strokes, is to have an even number of pick strokes per string. So typically I'm going to be starting each string with a downstroke and ending each string with an upstroke. So if I play, say, 4 notes on one string, down, up, that upstroke allows me to freely cross to any of the other strings from there. So I could go D string, B string, D string, down to the E string, D string, E string. But if I end the string on a downstroke, if I'm not moving in this direction, like if I'm not going with a downward sweep like that, so down, up, down, like that, I can't move to any lower strings from there. I can't really do. I have to change the pick angle to move to, say, the D string or the A string or the E string from there. So when we put this into practice and incorporate our left hand into a phrase, we can use the G dominant bebop scale for an example. And I have a really specific fingering that I like to use and play faster. So I'll start with an upstroke on G on the first string, and then I'll incorporate 4 notes of the scale on the B string. So again, you see that upstroke escape. On the G string, I'm going to do C and B. So far we have 1 with an upstroke, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then on the D string I'm going to have A, G, G flat, F. On the A string I'll have, that's E, D, C, B, and then A and G on the E string. So one more time slowly. So you first want to get it slow and get it to feel like muscle memory. And then you want to just speed it up. And once you speed it up, you'll be able to feel where those inconsistencies are in your right hand and left hand techniques. So here's an example of me using rest strokes over a jazz standard. So that concludes our video for today. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you were able to get something out of these 5 tips for up-tempo playing. And if you feel like digging a little bit deeper into this topic, feel free to check out my latest resource with jazz lesson videos, 25 up-tempo jazz etudes. You can find the link to download in the description below, and you can use the coupon code FAST5 for an additional $5 off. I'll see you next time.